Why is it so important to hire ethical people? Remember the philosopher Kant, who said something like, only do something if you would be comfortable if everyone did that thing. I call it the Kant's golden rule. He also said lying was the worst sin, because lying only works when people tell the truth most of the time. It relies on people telling the truth to work. So, one of the things that we look for when we make friends, we look for people we trust. We also want to work with people we trust. It makes work life better. Who wants to work with people who we don't trust, right? It's just kind of miserable. So, we try to hire ethical people, and we have tests to help us do that. After we've hired them, we try to help them make ethical decisions in the workplace. We want to make money, that's why we're in business, but there are limits on what we will do to make money. We don't break laws, we won't harm our environment, we will respect each other, our customers, and our suppliers. We will go out of our way to have each other's backs. We celebrate our individuality. Things like that, right? So we form a code of ethics, and then we make sure that our employees know it. We make sure that everyone knows it. And especially the managers, they have to set that example. Not only do we create this, but this is how we live our lives, at least our workplace lives. So once we have the code of ethics out there, published, working, we also need to make sure that we reinforce it by ethical training or ethics training. We want to make sure that the employees are aware of our code of ethics and how we handle different ethical situations. This helps us be more credible with our employees and helps them know beforehand. I mean, there are things that we get into in business that are tricky. We have people we work with, maybe we have suppliers that we work with, and we really like these people, and they want to take us to something that's expensive. Well, how do we react to that? What's okay and what's not? And going through scenarios like that with our employees helps them be more comfortable when those things come up. They can actually make the right call without offending. One of the things that we can train our employees to do is use this model of ethical decision making. So this is how we go about with any given problem making an ethical decision. So we identify the problem. What makes it an ethical problem? Think of terms of right, obligation, fairness, relationship, integrity. How would you define the problem if you stood on the other side of the fence? You might also look at it, what kind of problem would this be if it was on the front page of the newspaper or on CNN? Identify the constituents or the people involved. Who's being hurt? Who could be hurt? Who could be helped? Are they willing players? Are they victims? Can you negotiate with them? And can we do something to alleviate the problem, kind of work around it, right? Diagnose the situation. How did it happen in the first place? How could it be prevented? Is it going to get worse or better? Analyze your options. Imagine the range of possibilities. And sometimes we need a lot of help when we're doing this. Diversity can help us out a lot when we're trying to analyze our options. Make the choice. What's your intention in making this decision? How does it compare to the probable results? Can you discuss the problem with the affected parties before you act? Could you disclose without qualm your decision to your boss, the CEO, board of directors, your family, or society as a whole? Right? If you're having problems, you're like, well, this is what we're going to do in the best interest of our company. But man, I'd be kind of embarrassed if my wife found out about this, or if my family found out about this. Then that probably is a good indicator that this is not the right thing for you to do. Then you act. Do what you have to do. Don't be afraid to admit that you're mistaken, my bad, I'm the problem here, or my company messed up. Be bold in confronting a problem as you were in causing it. And sometimes we're not really bold when we cause problems, we just do it because we're stupid. But so when we think about an ethical climate, what we're thinking about is kind of like our climate that we're living in. If it's cold outside, it affects the way we behave, what activities we'll do. Same thing within a company. We have this organizational culture, which is a big part of that ethical climate, or the climate of the company. And that culture is key to fostering ethical decision making or hampering it. We talked before about how the CEO is responsible for the organization culture. Well, it's true here too. Management, especially top management, needs to be active in creating the ethical programs and being examples of those ethics that we put out for our employees. They also need to encourage employees to let us know when we're committing ethical violations. We need to encourage whistleblowing. Now that gets into problems because we want to trust each other, but how are we going to trust each other? One of the things we can trust each other to do is keep us honest and keep us straight. We're not trying to get people to lose their jobs, but we're trying to help people make ethical decisions that will be in the best interest for themselves and for the company. Now we're moving into the realm of social responsibility. What kind of social responsibility do businesses have, and to whom? We have two models here. One is the shareholder model and one is the stakeholder model. The shareholder model says the only social responsibility that businesses have is to maximize profits. And because of the way we report our profit making on a quarterly and then the fiscal year, we have a very short-term view of maximizing profits. I think the stakeholder model says that that is hurting us and that we need to have a long time view. So we need to maximize profits, but it's not just maximizing profits, but the firm's long-term survival. And when we say long-term survival within the community. So if the firm is going to survive in the long term, the community must be able to benefit and survive in the long term too. And then we get into this idea of environment and community service and outreach and making sure we have jobs for the people within the community, that kind of thing. So these are the two kind of models that we have. Shareholder, I would think of that as a more narrow time frame. When we look at stakeholder, it's a longer time frame. I was tempted just to kind of go on and leave that alone, but I need to come back to the shareholder model and just focus on it for a little bit. A couple of economists, Milton Friedman in particular, really believe that businesses should do what businesses do best. Make a good product and sell it for a profit. They don't really need to get entangled with any other social distraction. That's not their thing. Let other people do that. Let nonprofits, let the government worry about social problems, and let the businesses focus on business matters. They also think that when businesses get involved in social matters, it's really diverting a lot of time, money, and attention to doing things that they don't do efficiently. So that's kind of what the shareholder model is really looking at. In the stakeholder model, there are different groups of people. One's we call primary stakeholders, the other are secondary stakeholders. The next slide helps us get more into this. When we look at primary stakeholders, these are groups in which the organization depends on for long-term survival. They include shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, governments, and local communities. So those are the primary people, right? Secondary stakeholders, we look at those as special interest groups, media, trade associations. Unlike the primary stakeholders, however, they do not engage in regular transactions with the company and are not critical to long-term survival. Nevertheless, the secondary stakeholders are still important because they can affect public perception and opinions about the company's socially responsible behavior. In fact, they can influence the primary stakeholders. So that's one of the reasons that we worry about secondary stakeholders. What are an organization's social responsible for? What are their social responsibilities? Historically, it's just been an economic responsibility, economic and legal. They're supposed to make a profit by offering a product or service that's valued by the community, and that's the basic social responsibility. Organizations that didn't do that or didn't do that well came under pressure by people who had invested in them. And if the government looked at that company or the product or service that they offered and saw it as a strategic asset, they might come in and put pressure or even nationalize the company and replace its management. So there's that economic responsibility. In today's society, I think it goes even further where companies not only offer a product or service that is of value locally, but they're responsible for going out and securing resources and bringing them back to the U.S. that's of value to people in their country. Legal responsibility, basically, obey the laws and regulations. Ethical responsibility, when you're conducting business, don't tread on the rights of others. Act in a way that's responsible not just for your shareholders, but for the community at large. And then there's this idea of discretionary responsibilities. So society might have rules that businesses need to play in, and that's part of their responsibility to hold that role or play that part in the society. Now there's this idea that a company can actually strategically look at how do we respond to the shareholders claiming you have a responsibility to do something. The company can use a reactive strategy, and that's when they're doing less than what stakeholders expect. It may deny responsibility for that problem or fight any suggestion that they should try to solve that problem. So that's kind of a reactive stance. By contrast, a company using a defensive strategy will admit responsibility for a problem, but would do the least required to meet that stakeholders or those stakeholders' expectations. A company using the accommodative strategy will accept responsibility for a problem and take a progressive approach to doing all that it could be expected to do to solve that problem. A company using the proactive strategy will actually anticipate responsibility for a problem before it occurs. So we're looking for problems that people will think we're responsible for, and then do more than expected to address those problems. The last thing that we need to talk about is this idea of how social responsibility interacts with economic performance. A lot of studies suggest that there's really no trade-off between being socially responsible and being profitable. In fact, sometimes being socially responsible is great PR, will lead to more sales and thus more profit. We find that it usually does pay to be socially responsible, up to a limit, right? We're looking for things that the company in the realm of their business would be socially responsible for. But there's no guarantee, especially when we go outside that realm, that we're trying to be socially responsible. So we put a lot of money into protecting this national forest or whatever. It has nothing to do with our business. We're not into mining or oil or whatever. We are an internet service. So why would we be worried about this land grant or whatever? But if we're reasonable about how we're being socially responsible, it shouldn't hurt our profits.